Hi, my name is Matt Friedman. I was the editor on Palm Springs and The Farewell before that. And this is how I work. I guess the first thing that you'll probably notice is, three monitors, which admittedly is a little bit over the top. When I actually first set this up, I had finished dailies early for the day and found an extra monitor sitting in the back of the cutting room and figured I would set it up because it would probably be really funny and obnoxious. And so I did, and I've been cutting with three monitors ever since. And in the few situations where I have to give them up, it's painful. The main reason that I like it is, as you can see, front and center, I have my timeline full screen, and I can just always see all parts of it very comfortably, even if it's 12 or even 16 tracks. This makes me so much faster as an editor. The reason that I put the monitor on top of the timeline was because I had developed muscle memory in terms of selecting what side of splices I was trimming on by clicking in the composer tool. So for instance, if I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put a trim here, I can go up and I can click to move it to this side or this side. And that had become so ingrained and was something that I did without even thinking about it, that I needed the composer tool on top of the timeline. So that decided the other position of the monitor. But it's a really convenient way to have all my tools up here, my timeline full screen front and center. And then I also cut with the Avid line script. And that usually takes up a large portion of my third monitor. And I just love that I can work and not get bogged down by having to shuffle windows around or scroll up and down the timeline in order to see what I need to see, and can just really sort of sit with the performances and be with the performances without any of the other overhead. As you can see, I cut with waveforms turned on. I find them really invaluable, and it just helps me wrap my head around what's going on in each of these clips. One of the other benefits of having all my tracks be blown up so big all the time is, as you can see, I do a lot of mixing with volume keyframes. And having the timeline tracks blown up this much makes it a lot easier to manipulate the keyframes without having to increase the track size. If I want to go in and do some real fine tuning, I have settings that will blow up pairs of tracks even bigger. So I can go in and, you'll see I don't use the dissolve tool to do music crosses very often. I find I want a little more control over those dissolves, and I like to sculpt them individually on a case-by-case basis. So I'll blow the tracks up extra large so I can see what's going on until I can get the transition between these two music clips exactly right. I don't label my tracks. I think part of that is because I believe I was working on Avid before that was even an option, so I just never used it. But now I consciously choose not to label them because I want to spend all my time thinking about story and performance. And if I have tracks labeled, I'm going to be thinking about what goes where, which ultimately to me just doesn't matter. I get very used to, this timeline looks very complex, but because I've built it over time, I'm very familiar with where everything is. If I labeled tracks as like dialogue or sound effects, then invariably, I'll get to one section like down here where there's a lot of sound effects going on, and some of those have to spill over into dialogue tracks, and now the labels are just wrong. And that would slow me down. Like I would be thinking about I'm making a mistake or I'm doing something that doesn't conform to the rules I've set. And I just don't want to think about that. So no, I don't do labels. I don't really use colors. I've had assistants who use them. I tend to forget to turn them on. Even when I do, I don't find them all that helpful. Again, just because as I've built these things, I kind of remember where I've put stuff or what the waveforms look like. So I don't need the help of knowing that sound effects are one color or dialogue is another. I mean, the advantage to that, too, is that when stuff goes offline like this, you can see it much more easily. I cut with these things, these very long tail leaders. And the reason I do this is I was showing this timeline to my class at AFI the other day, and one of the students asked, how do you deal with all of those tracks? And the answer is I don't. Most of the time I don't deal with all of them. So even though I have them, I'm not going to worry about them. So like, for instance, in this scene, I have picture and a couple tracks of dialogue, but everything else that's going down here is backgrounds. Party crowd, happy party, desert night crickets, and music, with a couple other music options, because at this point we were in the process, we were figuring out what our songs were going to be in this scene. So when I'm cutting this scene, I will actually turn off the sync locks on all of these tracks so that I don't have to bother with them while I'm editing. And then I'm going to stay zoomed out here so you can see what happens to the tail leaders. But if I go in here now and I add some frames to this, what you'll see down here at the end of the timeline is I now know what tracks are out of sync. It doesn't really matter because there's no sync points in any of these tracks, and I can go through and work on this scene, and sometimes I'll be adding frames and sometimes I'll be taking frames out, but then when I'm done with the scene, I can look down to the end tail leaders and I can see, okay, I'm a net 56 frames out of sync. I need to add 56 frames to all of these tracks, and I can go to the ends of the tracks and just in one edit put them all back in sync, turn the sync locks back on, and then move on down the line. But yeah, it would be incredibly cumbersome to have to set up your trims every time you wanted to trim here on all of these tracks. So that's the purpose of these tail leaders. In instances where that's unavoidable and there's sync everywhere, I actually learned this from one of my students a couple years back. I didn't know this. But this also touches on one of the reasons why I love the Avid, and really it's the only system out there for me because so much of my professional life is spent in asymmetrical trim mode. It's just critical to me in order to be able to find the rhythm of a performance or a scene. And one of my favorite commands in the Avid is when I've set up a really complicated asymmetrical trim like this, and I do something here and oh shoot, I hit the wrong thing, I popped out of it. Well, Option U gets all your rollers back on the sides that they were set up on in the previous trim. And that's invaluable. And I showed this in class the other day as well, and half the class was like, oh my God, and the other half was like, yeah, I knew that. Like I said, one of them taught me this one year, so I thought I would pass that along. Up in my timeline here, I don't have a whole lot of buttons. I guess one of the ones I find most useful are being able to set up every color marker here. As all the markers have, different colors have different meanings depending on the show. Some might be sync points. I usually use red to mark sync points of things that I'm trying to line up. Different colors will denote visual effects or final visual effects or things that help the assistant editor. I've also put the effects mode down here since it's you can see I'm in Avid 2020 here, and it took me a while. There was some stuff that was changed in 2020 that it took me a while to adjust my muscle memory to, but there's some things in 2020 that are just well worth the cost of admission to me, or 2019, or whenever the UI changed. One of them is this alternating colors in the timeline tracks. That's something I had been asking Avid to do for a while, and it's so helpful when you want to trace back and turn on a track light. The line script similarly got some love in the 2019 Avid editions, and of course I love the background saving now. So those are some of the reasons why I'm working in this latest version. Line script is just absolutely invaluable. It makes me probably, I would say, 40 to 60% faster when I'm cutting or doing changes. It's especially valuable when you have a producer in the room. I cut a pilot once many years ago for Sean Levy, and he had never seen this before. And Sean is brilliant, and his mind moves so fast that you really got to work to keep up with him. And when he saw that he could look at every performance of every take just by double clicking and playing, he literally jumped up off the sofa. He was so excited. And it really does make me so fast because, in one instance, I was working on a movie and the studio wanted to see a different take. It was a romantic comedy, and so this was the last scene in the movie, and the two characters show up, and I had cut it like, it was going to be a foregone conclusion that they were going to get back together, and they were just sort of playing this scene a little tongue-in-cheek because they both knew it was just predestined, and the audience knew it was going to happen, and the studio wanted to see a version of it where it wasn't telegraphed what was going to happen in the end. And with the line script and my ability to go through and look at all the different performances of each line, I was able to cut that alternate version of the scene in about 20 minutes. It was that fast. So this is a lifesaver to me. One of the other things I really like about Avid is it has all these audio plugins, some of which are just really amazing. And the ability of your ability to load third-party plugins. And one of my favorite plugins that I swear by is this reverb plugin called IR1. IR1 is just reverb on steroids. And it comes with all of these presets. So you can put sound inside a car or inside a reverberant church. I use this a lot for ring outs of music. Deverb is good, but it has a tendency to alter the pitch slightly of ring outs of single notes in music. IR1 does not. So I use this church ring out, and it's a great way to be able to end a piece of music early without just fading it out. It also has this desert preset, which I find really good for situations where I just want, if I have like a line of temp ADR that an actor recorded on their iPhone and it feels very close to the front of the screen, you can put this treatment on it and it will just move the speaker back further away from the microphone. So that's really great and invaluable matching temp ADR in. And sound effects too, some of which are, recorded very close to camera. In this case, I used deverb because it wasn't music, but I use the verb to move things back into the back so they're not quite so distracting. And it's great on music just in general, because if you play a track of music just dry without any treatment on it, it's very upfront in screen, and it will feel like score. It'll feel like something we, the filmmakers, have put in it. But you can put a little reverb on it and push it back away from camera, as it were, give it some bounce from the walls in the scene, and it feels like it's now inside the scene. But it also will muddy up the lyrics just enough that they won't compete as much with dialogue under it. So IR1, deverb, use them a lot. Another piece of external software I use is this really great macro program that I have called Keyboard Maestro. And this allows me to map keys that Avid, for whatever reason, won't let me map directly in the program. Like I have zoom in and out on the timeline mapped to page up and page down, which you can't do in Avid, but you can make the macro in Keyboard Maestro, and you can assign that to a keyboard to a keystroke that you can map in Avid. And the other thing I use it for is, a lot of times I will go into red arrow mode, and I'll just move stuff around. And I want to audition it, but if I click over here to play it, I've now lost the selection. But so with Keyboard Maestro, I have one of my mouse buttons mapped to tell the Avid to skip the position bar backwards, and then I can play it, see how it sounds, go back again, play it, see how it sounds without having to reselect all these tracks in red arrow mode. One of the other things I really have come to appreciate about the new UI is this sliding bin list here. So every window that you open, you can float as many bin windows as you want, but every one you can open and get a list of all the other bins. And it took me a while to use that enough so that I remembered it was there. But now I find myself using it all the time. And at first too, I set it up. I set up the, to float every window that was open as opposed to opening them in tabs. But I've kind of come to dig the tabs now. It takes a while to get used to some of these changes. And I know editors in general are creatures of habit who oftentimes resist change. But sometimes it's good.